Well, all right. We are indeed on a downhill roll, I believe. You know, it has to be close to downhill. We started in about 1000 BC, and now we're in the 100s BC, so it's got to be downhill, right? But we are on the downhill roll. We had been talking about the Grecian Empire and how it had been broken up and how the Jews had been experiencing this shift in culture. What did we call that shift in culture, that enculturation? What was that process? What did we call it? It's named after a lady. Hellenization, yes. Yes, Hellenization. And the Greek word Hellen, Hellen represents Greece. And so Hellenization is the enculturation of the Grecian ways of life. So we've been talking about that, and we talked a little bit about how it affected the Jews, especially within the scope of religion that they had. And what we're going to talk about today is more physically impacting, politically impacting on the Jews, because this idea of Hellenism was not just something that was out there that a Jew could be influenced by. We're getting to a period in the Jewish history where Hellenism was forced on the Jews. And then we get to see the reaction of the Jews to that force. So what we're going to talk about today, let me get my marker here. We're looking at around, let's just say 300 BC, and that's very generic because it's really a little bit before that. That's when the Grecian rule started. And remember, we had the Grecian rule. Alexander's kingdom was broken up. And for about 100 years, they had relative peace. They were really under the rule of Pompey. Now, if you remember, here's the Mediterranean Sea, and we've got our little Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee, the big squiggle over here is the Jordan River. So if we were to divide the world, we're going to keep coming over here. Here's Italy. Egypt was down here, big Egypt. And Pompey, I'm sorry, not Pompey. Oh, wow, where'd that go? It was a P word. Ptolemy. It is P, it's spelled with a P. But Ptolemy took over Egypt, and then after some duking it out, the Seleucids got control of Asia. So up here we have the Seleucids. And if you draw a line, I spelled that wrong, but you know my spelling's terrible. If you draw a line about here, this is kind of the line of influence or line of control for these 100 years. If you read in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, there is a little hard to understand history of some goings on. We're going to say 164 BC for these 100 years, 150 years. And if we read, and we're not going to read the whole chapter because it's really frustrating. It talks about the king of the south and the king of the north, and how the king of the south's daughter was married to the king of the north, but then the king of the north stepwife or some sort of relative knocked off the daughter of the king of the south, and so they got mad and they started warring all over again. So we had these people competing with these people over and over and over. But the book of Daniel, chapters 11 and 12, give us some insight to what's going on in this period. And it's right in here that we're really going to slow down and talk quite a bit about this Hellenism influence that goes on right here in Palestine. But let's just, if you want to, flip over to Daniel. I've already got it open. I'll read a little bit for you. I'll try to read slowly. I get in trouble for reading too fast sometimes. Let's see. We're going to start. Okay, we're going to start in verse 29 of chapter 11. Now, what has already happened is the south has already had fights with the north, and the north has had some success. But then the south decides to gain control again, so the south comes up and recaptures Palestine and some areas in the north. And so now is a second time that the north comes down to fight it out with the south. Now, the king in control at this time is Aristobulus IV. Oh, I'm sorry, not Aristobulus, listen to me. Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV is the king, and we're going to come up with, he's going to be the center of a lot of conversation here in a little bit. But I'm just going to tell you, he's the king who's down here trying to beat Egypt once again. And here's what it says, verse 29, chapter 11. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again. But this time, the outcome will be different from what it was before. What it was before is he won. This time it'll be different. He won't win. Ships from the western coastlands will oppose him and he will lose heart. Here's what happens. The Ptolemies, the people in control in Egypt, reach out to Rome to say, hey, we need help. And they get to be friends. And so Rome comes down to Egypt when Antiochus is down in Egypt trying to invade. Now, Antiochus is afraid of Rome. Rome is starting to gain a whole lot of power. And to this point, Antiochus' dad has lost some wars with Rome. And so his dad had to, in fact, cause a lot of taxes and raid the temple funds. Temple funds are always raided, left and right. But raided the temple funds to pay for some of those duties and wars and things that were going on against Rome. So there was also already a little thing going on here. Rome comes down here to help Egypt. Well, Antiochus hits Rome and says, wait a minute, I don't want to fight this fight because I know I'm going to lose. But what happens, or at least as the story goes, the Roman leaders draw a line, a circle around Antiochus IV. And they say, you will not leave that circle until you promise you will not come back and invade Egypt again. Okay? So that's what it means when it says, ships from the western coastlands will oppose him and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the Holy Covenant. Well, he says, fine, I won't come back and I won't invade Egypt again. But by golly, on my trip home, I'm going to be madder than a hornet, and I'm going to do some dastardly things to the people who live there. Okay? So that's his mindset. Okay, that's just an aside. We'll visit that again later. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. They will set up the abomination that causes desolation. Hang on to that phrase. The abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant. But the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Okay, so people who try to hold firm to the covenant of God, he will violate. Okay. Verse 33, those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword, or be burned, or captured, or plundered. When they fall, they will receive little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the end of time. For it will still come at the appointed time. The king will do as he pleases. He will, and this is still that king of up here, the king of the north, will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods, that is Jehovah. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. At that time, and then it goes on and talks about some other things that might happen to the world around, or the lands around. And going down to chapter 12. Chapter 12 begins, "At that time Michael, the great prince who protects our people," now that's Michael the archangel, "will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt." Now it gets a little complicated here, and I'm not here to teach the book of Daniel today. One wonders exactly what end of times he's talking about. And let me tell you why. If we skip a little bit to verse 5, it says, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and there," let's see. He says, verse 6, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" And then he says, verse 7, "The man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and a half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. I heard, but I did not understand, and I wonder why, because none of us really understand that. So I asked my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? And he replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time," here's where I really want you to think, to grab. Verse 11, "From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of your days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." What on earth? Well, I don't know. I'm going to throw out a possibility to you, okay? I wanted to read that. Keep that in your mind. Now, I will say that Jesus refers to the abomination of desolation in the New Testament. I will also say the Jews see this in one way, and then the New Testament readers see this potentially in another way. Okay, the abomination of desolation has yet to occur to a lot of the Christian readers. But to the Jews, that has already occurred. And we're going to talk about that today if I can get to it. So I'm going to start talking really, really fast. No, I'm not. So that's Daniel 11. Now, 11 and 12. There is question. And I'm not going to debate it one way or another. How much of Daniel was written at the time of Daniel? And how much of Daniel was added to later? We talked last week. Remember we talked about the apocryphal literature and the things that were added to the books over time? And the parts of Daniel, there were additions to Daniel throughout time. Well, the Daniel that we have is still under debate today as to when it was written. So there's questions as to how much of it might have been written at the time of Daniel and written prophetically about the future, and how much of it might be historically written after the events actually occurred and they were just appended to the book of Daniel. Okay, so there is debate in the scholarly world about that. But what I'm doing today is bringing out what is written because it talks about the time that we want to focus on today. All right, so that's Daniel. Let's see, where do I want to start? Let's start before Antiochus. When Antiochus IV, and I'll write his name down, he is important. Antiochus the fourth, also known as Epiphanes. God manifest. God manifest. And if you'll notice in Daniel where it talks about the king will do as he pleases, he will exalt and magnify himself above every god. He is God manifest. He has promoted himself. Okay, so Antiochus Epiphanes is important. But before he leads, I mentioned his dad failed at some attacks on Rome. To pay for those attacks and to pay for the tribute that was necessary after that, he raided the temple. He raided the temple funds. Onias, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Onias was the rightful high priest at the time. Now remember, how did we get down to this high priest? What family lineage were the rightful high priests? Goes all the way back to Aaron. Say again? The Levites, who came from, well, actually, a branch of the Levites, right? The Levites were priests, but whose family was the high priest? Aaron. Right? When the tabernacle was set up, we read in Exodus and Leviticus, Aaron and his descendants would become high priests. And remember when we had our captivities, when we brought folks back from the captivity, we had some trouble figuring out who should and should not be priests. But we actually had a high priest that was a descendant of Aaron. Who was that? Ezra. Okay? It actually says he was a descendant of Aaron. So we still have some lineage there. We get all the way down to now, we're talking really about 170 BC. Onias is a rightful high priest. When the temple is raided for tribute or funds to Rome, he goes to Antioch to say, wait a minute, we need to fix this situation. You know, we have had, this goes against our religious nature. Okay, we will help you with taxes, but don't rob it from the temple. But while he's gone, Antiochus III, his dad, is killed. And Onias' brother offers Antiochus IV money to be set up as high priest. This is the first we see of the high priestly role as a bought and paid for office. Okay, I'm the highest, it goes to the highest bidder. So Onias' brother, and let me remember his name, I keep wanting to say Jason, but that doesn't sound right to me right quick. No, it is Jason. Jason is his brother. Now Jason is a Hellenized name, it's not a Hebrew name. But Jason, his brother, offers to pay money to be the high priest. And Antiochus IV says, done! I like that. Okay. But it doesn't last long. Because someone else offers to pay more money to be the high priest. And Antiochus doesn't give a care in the world about the religious structure of the Jews. So he's chasing the money. So he sets another guy up by the name of Menelaus as high priest. So all of a sudden, the rightful high priest, which is Onias, is ousted. His brother Jason gets assigned, but then someone outbids Jason named Menelaus. Now Menelaus and Antiochus start being friends with one another. And there is the cause of some trouble. And this all happens before that little event in Egypt that I talked about. Okay, that's all occurring before 164 BC. Actually 167. Antiochus, that little event in Egypt happens in 167 BC. So before 167, all of this is taking place. So now we have in Jerusalem a high priest going to the highest bidder. Now, what do you think devout Jews feel about that? Melina says, they don't like it. If you're a devout Jew, is that right? No, it's not right. So we have a group of people in Jerusalem and in Palestine who are they were already against Hellenism and the ideals of Hellenism. But now that Hellenism is not only starting to affect their culture itself, but now it's imposing on their religion. It's imposing on their religious structure and their devotion to the laws of God. So we have a group in Palestine that begins to form a rebellious attitude toward these things. And this group separates themselves out, and they're going to call themselves, and I'm just going to write anywhere on the board, the Hasidim. Or you will hear the term Hasidic Jews. Hasid means pious ones. Okay? These are the ones that are going to be fully devoted to the laws of God. And they are going to be anti-Hellenism, anti-Greek culture. And they could have dealt with the Greek culture affecting the social aspects, but when it started imposing itself on the religious aspects, that's when they had problems. So the Hasidim starts to pull away, and they start to philosophically rebel. Okay? They're going to be key in a couple of minutes. Okay. All right. Where to now? Let me see if I can find a place in my notes. All right. Let's go ahead and go. Let's go to 167. Okay. 167 BC, Antiochus IV marches through here and tries to conquer Egypt again. And this is when Rome put the little circle around him and he goes home with a poopy face. Okay? And on his way home, by golly, I'm gonna... And he says, oh, Jerusalem, I'm gonna be mean. And so he goes in and imposes Hellenism on the people. And what happens, he sets up all of these rules. He forbids sacrifices. Not only does he forbid sacrifices, but he sets up an altar in the temple to foreign gods. And, word has it, sacrificed pigs on that altar. Now, if you remember back, what is it about a pig that's bad? Unclean. They're an unclean animal. And he is sacrificing an unclean animal on an altar in the temple to a god that's not Jehovah. Remember when I said, that phrase, abomination that causes desolation? That is the event that is often looked at by Jews as the abomination of desolation, that causes desolation. When he desecrates the temple with these ungodly sacrifices to a God that's not Jehovah in ungodly ways, and it's all downhill from there. He forbids circumcision. Okay, circumcision was like the rite of passage. It was the way that a Jew noted that he was a Jew, right? So he forbids circumcision. If any mom circumcised their son, they were to be killed. He created a law that said all of the books of law would be burned, destroy. Basically, he was wanting to wipe out any trace of Judaism and impose Hellenistic religion with him mainly as the God manifest, onto the people. They were forced to work on the Sabbath and do things on the Sabbath that the law would not allow. They were forced to have feasts to Greek gods, Dionysius, Bacchus, the god of wine. And those may actually be the same god. Those Greek gods get all convoluted to me. He imposed these religious practices in such a way that the upright Jewish people couldn't stand it. Now, there are a group of Jews at that time that had already been influenced by Hellenism, and they were somewhat okay with these changes. But there was the other group, the Hasidim, that was absolutely not okay. And then you had the people in the middle that were like, I don't think this is right, but I don't know what to do about it. Now, because of this, there were people in Upper Palestine that were influenced by Antiochus and more influenced by Hellenism. And they retained a lot of the Greek ideals. Okay, now, some of them still worshipped Yahweh, but they were not as adamantly opposed. And we know a lot of them today under the area known as Samaria, the Samaritans. Okay, and then you have, that's actually right here. And then you have Galilee and the various aspects of Galilee. So, this is going on for about actually, does it go on for 3 years? No. It starts fast. And about 167 BC, there is an elderly priest in the town of Modin, and I don't know where, I should have looked it up. I don't know where Modin is. In my head, I keep thinking it's down here. Jerusalem is about right here. Jericho is about right here. Modin, I keep thinking is somewhere in here. I could be totally wrong about that, but I should have looked it up. But there was a priest in Modin and his family. And you know what? It might actually be up here. It could be over here. No. I don't know where it is. But do I need a map?
No.
Is Modin on it? I'd probably not, because it's not a well-known place. But what happens is the I'm going to say ambassador, the emissary of Hellenism, and the emissary of Antiochus comes into town and tries to force them to sacrifice to an unknown god, to a Greek god of some kind. And the priest of the village, named Mattathias, is asked to do it first, to be a good example. He refuses. And some timid Jew steps forward and either starts to or does offer the sacrifice. Mattathias kills that Jew and the emissary from Syria. He initiates a revolution. The Hasidim only needed a leader. All of the embers were there. They just needed a spark. And Mattathias provides the spark. And he kills this timid Jew that was going to cow down to the Syrians, and he kills the Syrian ambassador. And he and his boys run to the hills because they know there's going to be some sort of repercussions. What they do is they start a series of guerrilla warfare battles, fights. Now, Antiochus really doesn't think this uprising is as big as it's going to be. He thinks they're little skirmishes that can be put out fairly readily, fairly easily. So he sends down a little war leader, and Mattathias and his sons, Mattathias actually doesn't live very long. He's already elderly, but his sons especially are particularly good at guerrilla warfare, and they keep winning these little battles. And what happens is, as they win more and more battles, they're drawing more and more people to their cause. Because the ideals were already built up for the battle. They already wanted the revolt. They just needed a leader. They just needed someone to ally themselves with. And so Mattathias dies, and he tells folks that Jason should be, this guy named his son Judah. I could be wrong. Let me look. Judas. His son Judas, his third son I believe it is, should be the leader. And so Judas continues these battles and continues to win. Judas's name, his nickname, was the Hammer. We know it as Judas the Maccabee. Now remember last week when we talked about those extra books, those apocryphal books? There were 4 books, all with the same name. Those 4 books were called the Maccabees. They tell the story of this occurrence, this event. So Maccabee, M-A-C-C-A-B-E, spelling.
That's close. I think that's the way you spelled it last week.
Judas the Maccabeus. All right. Well, we'll go with how I spelled it last week. Okay. So these revolts come to be known as the Maccabean Revolt. And over time, they win and they win and they win. Eventually, in 164 BC, they conquer Jerusalem. They kick Syria out of Jerusalem. Now, about the same time, Antiochus IV kicks the bucket. So whether or not that played a part in it, I'm not sure. But about the same time, Judas was able to retake Jerusalem. When he did this, they cleansed the temple and set up the right sacrifices again. They brought back the books of the law. Now, does anybody know of a little Jewish holiday known as Hanukkah? Heard of it? Hanukkah is the celebration of the rededication of the temple. I'll give you one guess as to when that occurred. The 25th of the month of December. Let that sit for a little bit. But the Jews celebrate today even the cleansing of the temple. Now, back to Daniel, chapter 12. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, Antiochus IV abolished the sacrifice, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up. He set up those bad sacrifices in the temple. There will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Now, I'm just throwing this out there. How many days are between around 167 BC to 164 BC? Yeah, about 1,000 to 1,200-ish, depending on when it started and which year, and when it ended and which year. So, either the writer of Daniel was really good at anticipating what was going to happen, or this little bit was written after the fact. Okay. But what's interesting is it seems to fit in my little head, that little bit seems to fit when the temple was desecrated to when it was reconsecrated. Oh, but then the stories that we can tell after that. That was the Maccabean Revolt, which actually continued for a little more because Syria didn't like it, and they came down and they reconquered Jerusalem. But then, and then Judas was ousted, and he ran over here. But then these guys started having their own little political battles about who would win, about who would be leaders. They needed the Jews' support, so these guys went back to Judas and said, "Can you help us?" And Judas said, "Wait a minute, which one am I going to support, the new one or the old one?" And so he played a little delay tactic, and he supported one of them, and guess what? He actually died. Judas kicked the bucket, but he had two more brothers, Jonathan and Simon. Through politics, Jonathan and Simon got the Syrians to leave, and they got control of Jerusalem. This was not independence. This was agreement. Syrians left, and they said, "You can do your own thing, but just pay tribute to us." Okay? And they were more or less recognized as independent because there were parts of those times they weren't required to pay taxes. And when you don't have to pay taxes to anyone, you feel like you're independent, right? So there were independent thinking going on here, but the Syrians kind of left them alone. They had their own problems to worry about. And Simon and Jonathan, through politics, come back into this world. Now, Jonathan was set up as the high priest. Now, Jonathan was not a descendant of Aaron, but he was a descendant of Mattathias, who was a priest. He was a Levite. So that was at least digestible, far more digestible than Menelaus. When Jonathan kicks the bucket, Simon becomes the high priest. Again, descendant of Mattathias, descendant of a Levite, descendant of a priest, digestible. Well, what happens is the Hasidim calms back down because they weren't in it for the politics. They were in it for the religion. And now that the temple was cleaned up again, and now that their religion was calmed back down and they could actually practice Judaism like they believed Judaism should be practiced, they were kind of out of it. They really were fine. They were happy. Well, what they do is they say, we've got to fix this high priest thing. So they say, Onias, when he came back and he no longer had, remember, Onias was the rightful high priest. But his family was having some political troubles and they left the country. They were no longer around. So what they did was they said, Onias' family abdicated their rightful position. Because they abdicated, we need to find a new lineage to maintain high priesthood. That lineage would now be through Simon. And so Simon begins a new high priesthood lineage in Jerusalem. For a little bitty bit of time. Okay? But that was the thinking of the religious people at the time. We've got to fix the high priesthood issue, and this is how we're going to do it. Oh, another very interesting bending of the rules a little bit. What happens to a nation who is at war that can't fight one day out of every week? They're going to be defeated. Sabbath day was a big problem to the Jews when they're fighting wars. So Mattathias sets a principle that says as long as it's in basically self-preservation, you can fight on a Sabbath day. Once he sets that principle, then they started winning again. Yeah, because that's a big problem. If you're in a war with someone and you don't resist on Saturday, they're going to come in on Saturday and wipe you out. So we're getting to a time where we're bending some rules, aren't we? Making them fit our needs. Okay, where do we go from here? Simon. Okay. I have skipped some stuff that I would like to introduce, but for the sake of time and really, bless your hearts, you've been really patient with me. We're going to move on. We're entering a period that is known as the Hasmonean Dynasty. The Mattathias and his sons were known as the Hasmoneans. Okay? And their descendants became what we know of as the Hasmonean Dynasty. Not only were they high priests, but as we see a little later, they named themselves priest kings. Okay, so it's not only a religious dynasty, it's also a political dynasty. So Simon is high priest, and he passes on the priesthood to his son, and this name is very important to history, the Jewish history. John, we know it as John. Yeah, I would say it's probably not John, it's more like Jonas, but John Hyrcanus. Where am I looking? Yrcanus. John Hyrcanus becomes the ruler. Now, it is under John, Simon's descendant, that they no longer have to pay tribute to Syria. There is a pseudo-agreement that says they're still Syrian, but they don't pay tribute, and he's given more or less free rein. I think the agreement said as long as they give up some of the coastal cities to Syria, then they can live as they want to live. Well, what happens? John Hyrcanus was a savvy politician. He was a great military leader. And what he does is, after a while, he reconquers those coastal cities that he gave up to, by agreement to Syria. Not only that, but he increases the border of the Jewish-Palestinian kingdom to Davidic proportions. Do you know what I mean when I say that? If you recall how big the kingdom got under King David and how under King Solomon it was expanded, the Palestinians, the Jews, are now living in a free country that is the size of King David's kingdom back in 970 BC. That's a story we don't hear much about, is it? John was pushing the envelope. He was reconquering territory. Now, great as he is, he had some faults. In fact, what he did was he forced Judaism on some of the surrounding people. People that lived in this area. This area was the kingdom of Edom. Who were the descendants? Who was the ancestor of the Edomites? Let's go all the way back. Esau, Jacob and Esau. And the Edomites were descendants of Esau. They didn't get along with the Jews very well. But John Hyrcanus forced his religion on the Edomites. Now we know them as Idumeans. At this time period they're called Idumeans. I-D-U-M-E-A-N-S. Whew, I spelled it. Idumeans. He also forced Samaria and Galilee and these upper regions to have the Judaism, the Jewish religion. One other thing that he did, and this re-emphasized the tension between Samaritans, the people who lived in this area, and Jerusalem, the tensions. Remember way back when Nehemiah was rebuilding the temple, or actually the Jews had come back from captivity and they were told to rebuild the temple. It was before Nehemiah, actually. And someone offered to help them. The Jews that were already living in the land, some of them were Samaritans, offered to help them rebuild the temple, and they were told, no, you have no part in this. And what did they end up doing? They went up and built their own temple. Mount Gerizim, I believe was the name of the location. They built their own temple to Jehovah. John destroyed that temple. So he saw himself as not only the political leader, but also the religious house cleaner. And he was going to not only clean house, but enforce Judaism on the surrounding people in the way that he saw it. And so when he did this, that was just more fodder for the tensions between Samaria and Jerusalem. Because they were practicing Yahwism here, Yahwism meaning Jehovah, practicing devotion to Jehovah here, but he came in and said, no, you can't do that. You got to do it here. Now, was he right? Based on the law, there was only one place you could, and that was Jerusalem. So it was right, but it also rubbed them the wrong way. And so it just reinforced the tension that we see when we get to the New Testament. But John ruled for a long time. He was a pretty good ruler during this time. Now his son, I believe his name was Aristobulus. Hyrcanus' son Aristobulus was not so good. He was not a strong ruler. Now he didn't rule very long. He tried to expand even further, was semi-successful, but he did not do such a good job. Now, one of the things I should say, these Hasmonean rulers had already been influenced by Hellenism. They were rich. One of the niceties of the Hellenistic culture was leisure. Especially if you're rich, you have access to said leisure. So the Hasmonean rulers kind of liked a lot of the Greek social aspects. And so what we see is John and some of his descendants were very Hellenistic in the way that they thought and acted. Now, they were very devoted to the religious cleansing, or at least John was, the cleansing of the Jewish faith. But socially, they were very liberated. And a lot of Jews didn't like that. And it's time to go, but I'm going to throw out a word, and we'll pick up here again next week. There's a group of people that separated themselves from the goings-on in Jerusalem. We know these people as the Essenes. Now, you had people who were in Jerusalem that had a religious political persuasion. You had Sadducees, we'll get to that next week. You had Pharisees, we'll get to that next week. But you also had a sect called the Essenes. They allied themselves more with Pharisees, but they were a lot more restrictive. And so they moved out to the outskirts of town and kind of lived in a monastic kind of way. And they did their own scholarship, and they did their own way of life. They did their own teaching, and they held pure to their ancestry. They were not as influenced by the Hellenistic culture. The Essenes are the group that we know of from Qumran. Qumran is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I will also mention that it is very possible that John the Baptist was a member or at least affiliated in some way with this group, the Essenes. Okay. So all of this is going on. We have Hellenistic influences still. We do have cleansing of the temple. We do have some righting of what was wrong. But we have a group of people that says, we still don't like what's going on. We need to get back to the old ways. And so they move out and kind of set life out for themselves in more of a monastic orientation. And that's where we see them as we look at religious sects. We will start talking about the various religious sects next week. This is the time period that we start seeing those Sadducees and Pharisees. And then in the Roman time, we'll also see the Zealots. But the Zealots aren't there yet. Sadducees, Pharisees, and the Essenes are the ones that come on the scene, pardon the pun, today. All right. I like where we're going, and next week, I have little doubt that we won't get to see King Herod next week. Yeah. So we will probably use the word Matthew next week in much stronger ways. But there's still some juicy stuff that happens before that time. Still some pretty interesting stuff. Thank you for listening. I know it's kind of tedious to get your way through this, but I really think it's interesting. Even if you don't remember all the names or you don't remember all the events, you get the gist of what's going on so that you can say, I see where we've been. Now I know what's happening. Yeah.
Hey, you mentioned King Herod, but during this time of, that we've been discussing, there's been no king, right?
There has been no king because the kings were up here and down here. However, when Simon got hold of it and John got over it, and John did not claim himself as king. His son did. His son claimed himself as priest king. And so he claimed to be king of this area. And so we do have a few kings and a queen. We'll talk about the queen next week. For a little bit of time. But then Rome happens and Rome names a new king. And that king is Herod. And Herod comes from right down here. Yeah. Not up here. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the liberty that you've given to us in this nation to open your word and to learn from it, to study it, to obey it, and to practice it. Thank you, Father, for this class. Thank you for the time we get to share together. Thank you for your Spirit, and we pray that your Spirit leads us, guides us into your knowledge and devotion. Help us to be your light as we walk out these doors and bring other people to you and help them to see your glory. Father, thank you so much for Jesus. It's through him we pray. Amen.